Well, hello, Viva Albertos. Jason Hill, JP Hill over on the side. We're with you for another VEB podcast on a little earlier date. This is hopefully publishing on Friday morning, May 12th. We are recording this on Thursday, late afternoon, 5:30, with our special guest, Jeff Jones of the Belleville News-Democrat is with us again. And you guys know Jeff. He's a great resource on the Cardinals, beat writer, and just does an incredible job of reporting. Along with Gabe. How's it going, Gabe?
Going good.
And Adam. Adam is with us as well. No Heather and Blake today. They are bailing for other less better things, I would say. So, Jeff, how's it going? How was your road trip?
It's going. It was short. It was fairly unusual. You know, you don't typically get a trip to Chicago that doesn't have any day games involved in it, but that was the case this week. Hectic, certainly on Monday. The big Willson Contreras return drew a whole lot of folks out to Wrigley Field to see that, on top of the news and everything else. So, you know, it was busy, I guess is the way to phrase it. And home now rather than in Boston, so I at least did not have the joy that I know some folks had of the 5:15 a.m. Southwest flight from Midway to Boston this morning. I dodged that one, slept in, got coffee, drove home. So easier day for me than other people.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll just jump right into the topic of the week. Actually, I feel like it was kind of a good thing. We talked about doing this earlier in the week while you guys were in Wrigley and kind of getting the breaking news perspective on the Willson Contreras issue. But now it's kind of died down, more information's come out, and maybe we can get a little bit more perspective on it. So, Jeff, from your chair, what in the world is going on with the Cardinals and Willson Contreras and the catcher position?
So the things that I think that we know that we can say comfortably are that they have maybe not been the expectations they've had for what pregame preparation for catchers looks like has been to a certain standard. It's been to a one-person standard, to be honest, for nearly 20 years now. And Contreras came in, obviously has his own background, has his own experience, and frankly, look, was known to be a guy that the bat is the reason to sign him. Right, he's a really good hitter for a catcher and an adequate defender. When they got to spring, there was a lot of focus on framing, receiving, that type of stuff. And in those areas, they have seen progress. But I don't think that either they didn't know or didn't discover until later in the year that there was going to be some friction with how the pregame preparation looked. And so then it became this rollout that became just a mess, just a messaging mess. And really, more than anything else, and I think the point that the Cardinals have made in recent days, which is fair, is that the thing itself is not nearly so drastic as the reaction to it has been, but that is largely of their own doing. That is largely a result of not having a coherent explanation of how this came together. That is largely the result of sending Ali Marmol out to explain it every day, while John Mozeliak has not. You'll notice that Mo talked to Ken Rosenthal, but hasn't talked to anyone else, as far as I'm aware, about this since this all started Saturday morning. So, this is the result of a kind of incoherent messaging strategy, at least people guessing, and frankly left Willson kind of out there on his own until we heard about this big meeting that apparently happened on Sunday that was designed to get this under control. And so I think all told, this is going to end up being a small blip, a small ripple into what this looks like for Contreras long term. But it's definitely an unforced error, and kind of the kind that happens when you're going through a stretch as a team that you weren't prepared for and haven't been prepared for a very long time.
All right, and you guys can jump in here with any questions you have, but let's unpack that. That was a wonderful explanation. It's one of the most concise explanations I've heard of exactly what's going on so far. So the Cardinals and the catcher position, you mentioned obviously Molina has been pretty much the only full-time catcher that Marmol and most of the front office personnel even, have worked with, because he just was there for so long. The Cardinals obviously have high demands of their catchers. And again, you guys jump in. I've got 5 or 6 questions around this. Do they demand more than other organizations? Or was this just a Yachty thing that, that now they're used to a certain thing and no one else does this? Like, unpack that for me a little bit.
So the explanation that Contreras gave Monday was that the Cardinals' preparation is not more, it's just different. And to some extent, like, that makes sense, right? You have a coaching staff, you have an infrastructure from organization to organization. The vocabulary might be different. The way they talk about plays might be different. Just even and I wish I had a good example of this off the top of my head, but just even on a granular level, going from one manager to another, even when they've come up in the same system, they might describe the same stuff differently. It's just flat like communication vocabulary type stuff. The other part of it that I think is relevant here is that the Cardinals did not know what they did not know, which is to say that we heard for a long time, about all the work that Yadier Molina did, and that's great. I don't know that the people in charge had a really good appreciation for how much their process was tailored to Molina and how much of their process couldn't have existed for any other catcher, like let alone Sean Murphy, Christian Vasquez, whoever, how much their process could have existed for anyone else because it was one person specific. And, I think I was really interested to hear the explanation, because I asked the question Monday. I think it was Monday. I asked how much they've changed their process for Willson, right? Like, because the way that this has been talked about with Contreras, it's like they're teaching him to do whatever. The guy's caught for 7 years in the big leagues and has 5,000 innings of major league catching experience. So it's not like he's coming in from scratch. And so I was curious, like, how much of what he used to do and what he prefers to do have you all onboarded? And the answer I got was nothing, which, okay, but if that's the case, then it should not come as a giant shock. And it's been a little bit of a rougher landing than they might have preferred.
So go ahead, Adam. Adam, go ahead. Then I'll ask my question. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to mention, I think this is a perfect case study of how, as fans and as analysts in general, we kind of tend to jump the gun a little bit, right? And especially we've mentioned before, as Cardinals fans, we tend to be a tad more spoiled than other fan bases in terms of when we see our team not really posting the results we'd like, we kind of freak out a little bit. But when we talk about the switch from Contreras to Kisner, everybody went up in heels about having, literally going from a negative, like 1 point something WAR player throughout his career and never doing anything offensively, going to that player from a guy who you just spent almost $100 million on to be your like Yadier Molina heir apparent because you didn't buy into Ivan Herrera. So for me, it's a little interesting to see just how everyone just kind of was flashing concerns when it happened. But now we're seeing just the OPS difference in pitchers. And the pitching staff, when they want to deal with, when they're dealing with Andrew Kisner versus Willson Contreras, it's almost night and day. So, and those are splits that we didn't have access to before the move actually happened. And that's something that I think a lot of people really failed to consider. And that's something I think we need to really remember, that, hey, these teams have a lot more information and a lot more data to deal with than the rest of us do. So whenever they make a decision, they're not dummies. They know what they're doing to a degree, or for most part, we like to think. But it kind of makes sense while you have Kisner behind the plate. And I agree with you, Jeff. I really hope it's like a temporary thing where because you invested so much in Willson. But when you have a guy like Kisner, I think a very legitimate argument can be made that he's the best defensive catcher on the 40-man roster, aside from maybe including Tres Barrera, Ivan, and Willson, right? I think if I'm missing anyone else. And it's unfortunate, right? That's just kind of goes to show just a lack of catching depth. And honestly, the last thing I want to mention is that it just could be a feel from for the pitching staff, right? Some of the guys like Montgomery all the way down just feel that, hey, you know what? Our pitch comm works better with Kisner. Like he understands us better, and he shepherds a pitching staff a lot better than a Willson Contreras might at this point, right? And especially with Kisner having been there for a few years already. So I really, really hope this is a temporary thing. I think it will be. But I genuinely do feel bad for Andrew Kisner to a degree, because I do think he got a little bit too much hate. And I was on this bandwagon too, so I can't say that I'm innocent either. But I can kind of see why the move has been made, and it's working so far. So we'll see, but baby steps.
So I think. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff, please.
No, I think one of the things that's been interesting about this year, and really since the end of last season, is their handling of Kisner in general. Because from day one of the offseason, it was, oh no, he can't be our starter. Like, that was unequivocal. There was no doubt about that. Which, look, there are a lot of backup catchers who play for a long time in the big leagues, and not a lot of them are very good. Because if they were, they would be starting somewhere because there aren't that many good catchers, right? That's sort of the nature of being a backup catcher. And so what you want is for your backup to know the staff, to be able to handle them, and to be able to fill in and not hurt you behind the plate on days when they have to play, which is a thing that Kisner does well and has sincerely improved upon over the last handful of years. Now, at the same time, the bat has kind of gone up in smoke because he had whatever it was, 200 at bats in 3 seasons or whatever the hell, and found himself in a spot where the hitting wasn't ever really able to lock in. But yeah, I think in the short term, he's fine for what he's doing. If you look at last year, he caught Michaelis very frequently throughout the season, to the extent that the Cardinals had to go out of their way to get Molina starts with Michaelis in the last week of the season so that he could catch him in the postseason, for instance. And I think filling in with the other guys comes pretty naturally to him. The question is going to be what that looks like and how it sustains. And when the time does come, when Contreras goes back behind the plate and makes his next start at catcher, which now the message is that's going to happen this season. Who knows when, but it's going to happen. When that happens, I will be curious to see which pitchers throw to Contreras and which do not, because my guess is going to be that there is going to be a pretty clear delineation.
Gabe, you got anything to jump in on?
Well, I was just going to say, to sort of defend both the Cardinals and Contreras, I think Contreras was put in a really bad spot because if you look at the 5 starters, not because they're bad, most of them weren't in ideal situations. So Michaelis is the clearest because he had like 1 start in between the World Baseball Classic and the regular season. And I think in hindsight, obviously, he should have probably made 2 spring starts and not pitched on opening day. But I kind of blame his poor start based on how misused he was in the World Baseball Classic, where he wasn't able to throw like a normal spring training. Instead, he threw like 30 pitches in his first outing, and then I think he threw 60 in the second. Like he didn't have anywhere near normal spring training. So I don't know if any catcher really helps with him in that instance. And then Woodford isn't very good. So I think no catcher is really going to make him look great. And then I don't really know what's going on with Matz, but Montgomery had the most normal spring training with him and basically is pitched fine with him. And the last guy I would say would be Flaherty, who's missed like the last two or 3 years, mostly missed it to injury. So there's 2 possibilities. Either he's broken down and a catcher doesn't solve that, or he's still working through his mechanics, still working on his release point. And again, I don't know that a catcher is really solving that issue. So I just think he's getting a scapegoat mostly because like most of this, I don't know how much a catcher's solving these issues.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. I think there's really a limited amount that Contreras could have done differently. You know, they're to me, when I watch Contreras catch a game, the issue is not with the starters. The issue has been some handling of some of the relievers, right? Like some of the pitch selection stuff with Hicks has been weird. Some of the pitch selection stuff with Helsley has been a little bit weird. That, to me, is where I saw some of those things pop up, and less with the starters, where you can do more work and you can do more prep. And it looked to me like that was being done, because I think you're right in terms of the 6 guys they've run out there and the flaws that they have. And Michaelis has been way better over his last 5 starts. Montgomery has been pretty consistent, save for last night when he, only had fastballs, and that was it. He could spot the fastball, didn't have a change, didn't have the curve. Matz is figuring out the curveball so far, and his most recent start, the answer seems to be to not throw it, which I guess is a strategy if it's not going well. And with Jack, who knows? I honestly, it's so hard to say from day to day what that looks like. So yeah, I agree. I think that, and that again, that goes back to me to the messaging problem, which is that like Willson had to eat it. That was probably not fair, and he turned it into as positive a thing as he could.
So I just want to circle back to something that you it sounded like you said, Adam, and I just wanted you to maybe clarify a little bit. Is there statistical evidence that the pitching staff has been better with Kisner since this change? What are you seeing with that? 'Cause I haven't looked at it much. I've seen some ERA stuff, and I don't even know that I've seen FIP out there on it. So I should have just, thrown that away. But of course, I went into my narratives right now, so got lost in that. So what have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, I was just referring to a tweet that I was looking through. I think it was like a week and a half or so ago, where it said OPS against with Kisner behind the plate versus Contreras behind the plate. and I think it was somewhere in the 700s with Kisner, and then somewhere in like the high 800s with Contreras. So I mean that's obviously a massive difference in against production, where you have a guy like Contreras who's having trouble really getting on the same page with his pitchers versus a guy like Kisner, who I mentioned does have a little bit of a better chemistry, having working with the same guys for a couple of years. And obviously, like we know, it's no secret that that Contreras was likely the backup plan, that Sean Murphy was the primary option, and that the Braves just ended up winning the bidding war, right? They were able to offer a package that Oakland liked better, and then St. Louis we saw that tweet that obviously we don't really know what happened, but it's also no secret that Contreras isn't the best defensive catcher. We knew that, and it was always going to be a downgrade from Yachty, but a potential upgrade from his recent offensive woes because he's getting older. So I think given on that, I guess I kind of gone on a slight tangent, but in general, I just saw where Kisner was a better defensive player than Contreras, just because simply you saw the offensive outputs against this year. And I'm hoping they can get better with Contreras potentially returning.
I was going to say I think that's changed a little, because this is a tweet from Brandon Kiley. He said starting pitcher ERA prior to April 29th, when they mostly moved on to Kisner, was 5.05, and since then it's been 6.33 for the starting pitching ERA. Small sample size and all that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that we especially like yesterday's start, and I think a couple of games ago we gave up a lot of runs. The starter did, so I think that it may be a little closer of a bridge at this point.
And from that date too, that would include, I believe, the really bad Flaherty blow up game, which Contreras caught, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, I have a hard time putting that one on Contreras, to be honest.
Yeah, but I think in general, like the feel and the general consensus in the clubhouse, and obviously we've seen the move happen, is that the pitching staff is a lot more comfortable to have better chemistry with Kisner, at least right now. It's nothing against Contreras. Everyone loves Contreras. It's just that right now the fit is better for having a guy like Kisner than it is having a guy like Contreras.
Yeah, I think that's all. I think that's all perfectly fine and good in the short term. I do get it. I see it. And especially if it's in the context of this is a long-term relationship with Contreras and we need to be sure that we get it right from the beginning. If that's their argument, I get that. It was messaged really piss poor and put Contreras in a really bad spot immediately before returning to Wrigley. To drop that on Saturday before they went to Chicago on Monday, right? It is antithetical to my job for me to tell them to withhold things, and believe me when I say I'm happy that they didn't. At the same time, boy, would it have been easier for them to just lie and say that his ankle hurt. Take a week and say that he's hurt, right? And that's that. I don't want them to do that, to be clear, in my job. But from their perspective, why would you not do that? Why not just that's the part that blows my mind, because ultimately, this is a relationship game, and it's a relationship business, and it's a 5-year deal with Contreras. And as much as I think everyone kind of appreciated getting on the same page with Wainwright and with Flaherty in that meeting, neither of those two guys is probably going to be here next year. And so, from a leadership perspective, it sure seems to me like you would want to reverse that causality, and you would want to have Contreras being the guy kind of heading this whole thing up. But look, I mean, guys need support, and that's Adam made the point that they needed as a team to get behind him, and they needed as a team to patch that up. The unspoken part of that is, if the team thought that Contreras needed to see a sign that they were confident in him, what had he seen to make him think otherwise? And that is the problem.
Yeah,
I agree.
So from your understanding, is what's happening with Contreras the Cardinals' issue with Ivan Herrera, who would, from a bat perspective, seemingly be ready for the major leagues, in my opinion?
Yeah, so I think that they're separate. I think that the Contreras conversation is happening outside of Herrera. I think that, honestly, I don't think that Herrera is a consideration in all the ways that Herrera might be a consideration. I think that, and look, there is still time to change, and he's 22, 23, right? There is time for that to change. if they thought that Ivan Herrera could play in the big leagues right now, Trace Barrera wouldn't be here. And if they thought that Ivan Herrera could play in the big leagues like now, they wouldn't be in a position where Andrew Knizner is going to end up catching 10 games in a row or whatever it is. It wouldn't happen. Right.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying though, is the game calling and stuff, like they're concerned because I know why he's not in the big leagues ahead of Barrera. Barrera's I don't even know if he's gotten on a bat. Knizner's gotten like all the playing time. So I get that. But I mean, I was just curious if they're like they're parallel situations where they were concerned about his game calling, game planning, and because like I said, from a bat perspective, I mean, he's not going to like light the world on fire, but he's got a really good patience at the plate, and he'll probably run a decent OBP. And for a catcher, that's pretty much all you need is a backup at the least.
I think that's right. I think there are fair parallels to be drawn between the way we saw them handle Herrera last year and the criticisms they had last year about his game prep and his game calling, and what we're seeing with Contreras this year. I think that's definitely fair. I think the difference primarily is that, it didn't reflect as poorly on Ivan Herrera that they had to go out and get Austin Romine last year as it does reflect on Contreras now, given his age and his prominence, right? Like, I think the last year from a Cardinals perspective, you could still say, well, Herrera's working through some things. That's a little harder to pull off when the guy in question is 30 and your primary only acquisition of the offseason.
Yeah, I don't want to. We should leave the Ivan Herrera thing alone, but part of me is also like, he's only been a Cardinal, right? They've been raising him up to be the catcher of the future, but yet he was sent out early from spring. He barely got any time last year. He wasn't even a consideration this year. They brought in Trace Barrera. Like, what does he have to do to get himself ready defensively? I mean, like, he's second year in AAA. I realize there's more offensive work, but it seems like, Knizner doesn't have a lot of future with this organization either. It seems like this would be the opportunity, or at least sometime this year, to let Herrera learn what it is that they're demanding of their catchers.
Sure. And I think the fact that they are not interested in doing that tells you what they think about his capacity to pick that up. I think this is a situation where you follow what they do and not what they say. And Herrera's not here. They have kept 3 catchers on the roster at Memphis all year long. Like, good for Nick Raposo that he got promoted to AAA. Memphis does not need to have 3 catchers they just don't, right? And the fact that has been the case, and the fact that, for example, Raposo got promoted and not Pedro Paje, because Paje is going to stay at Springfield and work with pitchers because that's more important for them. That's where they want him, right? All of that says to me that whatever they are saying publicly about Herrera, what they're doing publicly about Herrera, tells you what kind of future he maybe does or doesn't have with this organization.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you see obviously the slash line isn't like pretty at all. You see it's like a 95 WRC plus right now at AAA. This is the second go round at the level, and you would really be hoping that he's going to be producing if he's going to be a top 100 prospect, especially given his age now at this point. And he's got major league experience. But like you saw, Jeff, you mentioned 3 catchers, not just in Memphis. I'm going to go ahead and take an extra step and say 3 catchers now in St. Louis, right? You saw Barrera, I think you mentioned that earlier. You got Barrera, Contreras, and Knizner. So they're really making an effort to not promote Herrera at this point, because they really do believe that, hey, we might have something in him, but we're not gonna push the clock and try to do anything and keep him on the bench when we think we can get him reps in Memphis and get him opportunities to try to get something better. I think the framing is probably on its way. I think that'll be fine, but the ability to really produce, he can make bat to ball. He hasn't done it this year. I think he can, but really making consistent contact and hitting the ball hard on a consistent basis is going to be something hard. I think.
Yeah, I agree, but also you're talking about a catcher, and if you go back and look at Knizner's stats, there was very little hard hit contact there either, and Knizner was. I'm not, it's not really. I not even about the offense. I just am wondering at this point, are these Cardinals, are they going to be able to develop catchers if these are the kinds? If Ivan Herrera, who has a pretty good defensive track record in the minors, as far as scouts and everything that I've heard, if they can't get Ivan Herrera ready to be a potential backup in his second year of AAA with a 16% walk rate, I just keep coming back to the fact that, it seems like they're asking an awful lot, and they might be digging themselves a hole at the catcher position here.
I think a thing that comes to mind here. There is a concept that we get asked about from time to time that I think is pretty well a dead concept, and that's of players getting called up to get showcased, right, in the trade. You bring a player to the majors so people can see what he can do. I think it is much more common that organizations do the other thing, which is not promote guys so that their flaws are not exposed. And if the Cardinals are looking at their depth chart and they think that Herrera best serves them as a piece rather than a player, then you could make an argument that they are better off to not bring him to the majors and have him exposed in hopes that they can still find value there.
Yeah. See, that to me, that's a way more exciting, even though I'd love to see Herrera and see these prospects develop. That to me makes a lot more sense than Herrera just still doesn't meet our standards or won't meet our standards. So showcasing him makes sense. Do you guys have any other questions on the Contreras and catcher situation? I could talk about this one for hours, but we've got 3 or 4 other controversies we've got to get to tonight. So you guys got anything else? All right. Let's talk about the vibe in the clubhouse. Jeff, has anyone yelled at you lately in the media room or in the clubhouse? What are you doing?
When's the last time I got yelled at?
Yeah, can we pour into you a little bit here and the rest of the beat writers? Because it seems like you guys might need a little love.
It has been a while since I can think of a couple times, but it's been kind of a while since I got yelled at. So I probably have one coming. But I generally I have been pretty good at figuring out when those are on the way and just deciding to step around them, because it's not like the benefit for me is I don't write a game story every day. So I don't have to talk to the starter every day if it's not essential to what I am writing. And so when I go downstairs and I can see what's coming, this is probably not best practice. Sometimes you just stick your recorder into the scrum. Sometimes you see what's coming and you go, you know what, this is not for me today, and I'll just stick my recorder in the scrum and we'll work out from there. I probably isn't being a good teammate on my end, but look, the vibe in the clubhouse is they're losing a lot, and when you lose a lot, it's hard for the clubhouse to have a lot of energy in it. And for all their protestations that no, everything in here is good, everything in here feels right, that doesn't seem to be the case to me. Not that I think that there are some like big divisions that are, I don't think there are big rifts happening in the clubhouse. I think that people are short and people are in a bad mood because they're 12 games under 500 and winning the division is going to be impossible, really hard, something like that at this point. So, that gets in the way of being in a good mood and having a light clubhouse.
Jeff, I had a really quick question for you, I guess, just before anyone else wanted to hop in. In terms of, managers and coaches all around sports, we see guys, like amazing coaches, amazing tacticians. I kind of wrote about this in my previous article, get fired all the time just because they lose control of the clubhouse, right? They're not able to really round everyone in, and some of the players and the stars lose respect for the coach and are not really able to like have that effective communication. So, obviously, that hasn't really been, it has been an issue in St. Louis in recent years, ever since La Russa has, he left and he retired momentarily. But do you see any issue with Ali Marmol, you being in the locker room? What's the mood do you see? And if obviously you're kind of shaking your head.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, no, I think that the situation with Ali is complicated. It's not even complicated. He's the manager. He's going to continue to be the manager. I think there's very little chance of that change. Like, for that to change, it would have to go so monumentally off the rails from a win-loss perspective that there would be broader organizational changes. And ultimately, that is sort of, in a weird way, that is good job security for him, because it would be super hard to justify letting the baseball ops department hire a third manager in 5 years without making any changes to the leadership in baseball ops. I say that at the same time that when Mozeliak announced his extension this spring, he also said that it was going to come with a transition plan, that they were going to get to a point where they were going to start looking at what did the next couple of years look like. Now, that coincides with what they're doing right now, which is putting a wrecking ball through the complex at Jupiter and rebuilding it from the foundation. I think it is entirely fair to think that Mozeliak probably at the end of this season, for instance, could get promoted into sort of a senior position that saw him maybe out of day-to-day baseball ops. He's talked about that being a thing that maybe would happen over the life of his contract. I say all that to say, if that is the plan, if their timeline looks like this winter, Mo moves up, and then you figure out what's going on with Gershon, Flo, and Moises and all those guys. To make a managerial change, you would have to expedite that, and you would have to do the front office stuff now, because it would be really hard to justify doing the manager without any of that other stuff happening.
I agree. Yeah, because especially they've been there for so long and they've already flipped the manager and the coaching staff over several times, right? That something's got to give at this point. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it just, I mean, just even from a logistics perspective, from a PR perspective, and also from if you're Bill DeWitt and Mo comes to you and says it's time to change the manager again, however tight their relationship is, at some point Bill's going to go, well, wait a minute, this is the third time we've had this talk in the last 5 years, and so what the hell's going on here, right? Like, at some point that question has to get asked, and would get asked, and Mo, frankly, is smart enough to know that and to not put himself out on a limb earlier than he wants to be voluntarily, I guess.
That's true. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
It seems like a common thread. And I don't want to make connections that aren't there. And I guess that's what I'm kind of going to ask you about here in a second. One of the things that Matheny sort of got him in the end was the clubhouse culture and some of the stuff that went on between Hicks and some other things. You know, I don't know all the details. I'm not sure if you were on the beat then or not, but
it was.
Yeah. Okay. So some interpersonal and communication leadership issues in the clubhouse. Schilt, we knew there was, I mean, I don't know that we know exactly what it was, but some sort of conflict between him and Albert, him and the front office, the analytics, things like that. Now, in Marmol's relatively short tenure, you've seen a pitching coach exit and a hitting coach exit somewhat unexpectedly. It sure seemed like they wanted to retain them. Holiday, I don't want to make too much of this. So I know every time I mention this, fans freak out. Please don't understand that I'm equating all of these situations, listeners. I'm just mentioning it as another example. Holiday comes in one day, leaves the next because of the workload and family issues. Tyler O'Neill gets thrown under the bus pretty quickly. Now you've got this Willson Contreras thing. There's probably some other stuff we've mentioned today. I mean, you tweeted it out. It's not necessarily the same thing, but Zach Gallen had some comments on his time in the organization, some other stuff like that. Not all of those tie back to Marmol, but is there a communication and culture issue here with the Cardinals that's showing up in multiple ways that we haven't been able to connect the dots until now?
So I want to unwind some of this, right? Because I think when we go back to this offseason, well, actually, even going back further to Schilt and the way that decision got made, there were definitely some conflicts behind the scenes. It wasn't just Schilt and Mo. There were conflicts between Schilt and a number of people around the club. Some that people might, and this is a territory where this is one of those things that I have heard and have not been able to write. Right, so I want to be very upfront about that.
I totally
but there were conflicts that occurred behind the scenes that brought the Cardinals to a place where the decision was not, is it time to fire Schilt and do a search? The decision was, can we do Ollie instead? There was not a search when they moved on from Mike Schilt. It was a binary decision between Schilt and Marmol. There was not a let's fire Schilt and then interview 5 people. That didn't happen. It was, is it the same and can we move on easier with the new guy? And if the answer was yes, then they did it because they weren't going to. They couldn't extend Schilt at that point, and so it was easier, faster, cleaner to just do it that way. In terms of the coaches last offseason, these are all distinct. I think these are all very different things that we should probably talk about, right? Like Jeff Albert, they were ready for Jeff to leave. Whatever Mo says now, however that makes him look, time was up. That relationship was not great. The communication with the clubhouse from Jeff was not great. That had reached its boiling point. With the pitching staff, the plan, I'm very confident, was to move Brian Eversgerd into his senior manager, advisor, whatever position, have Dusty act as the bullpen coach, and to have Dusty sort of shadow Maddox maybe for a year or two before Dusty took the job over. So they did, I think, they would have liked to retain Maddox in as much as they would have liked to have him in kind of a more emeritus type position as they transition to Dusty. And I think Mike Maddox, to his credit, was like, yeah, I'm not interested in that. Like that's not a thing that he was going to want to do, both in terms of, what he, I think, probably thinks about himself, in terms of his living situation. He lives in Dallas. He's always lived in Dallas. So now he's home half the year. That is, I think, kind of a big deal. My guess would also be, frankly, knowing that Mike Maddox was making, that he was making a 7-figure salary to be a pitching coach, I got a real strong supposition that maybe they were not going to come back with that for a new contract, which was, maybe going to be a non-starter. All of that is to say that they were prepared to move on without Maddox, even though they maybe would have administratively preferred to hang on to him for a year or two. In terms of Holiday, I think that one is just as simple as the timing of the Holiday situation coincides with right around when they would have started doing planning for the start of spring training. Yeah. And I think that there probably was a little bit of Matt Holiday, who's been around the game for a long time, had a long major league career, thought he had a really good idea of what the bench coach did every day. I think there's a really good chance that Matt Holiday got a different, better idea of what the bench coach did every day and went, oh no, I don't want to do this. I think that's a real possibility, which is not a dig on Holiday. I wouldn't want to do it either. It's a lot of grunt work. That's not a very fun job. I can't fault him for that. Which is to say that, like, all of those things, they look bad stacked up, but right. Each is different enough from the other one that I don't think it reflects necessarily on the clubhouse. Now, what I do think is reflective of clubhouse communication is that Mo knows how to make sure the blowback goes somewhere else. You don't get to his position without knowing how to do that, which is not to say that he has been intentionally scapegoating, right. But that is to say there's a reason why we were sitting in the office on Saturday morning with Marmol being told, well, actually, maybe he's going to play the outfield because Wilson's really athletic. And then 24 hours later, Mo was on the phone, not to his manager, but was on the phone to a national reporter directly contradicting what his manager had just said. That doesn't happen by accident either. And so if there is a communication problem, I don't think it is between the manager and the players. I think it is intentional on the part of the front office to some extent.
Well, that was all extremely enlightening, Jeff. I'll be honest. That was a great rundown of information.
The really simple thing would be to go, yeah, the guys all think that Marmol's a joke, but that's not the case. That's just realistic. That's not how it looks. And honestly, it's also not the case that the guys in there think that like Mo sucks too. Like that's not a thing. That's not the case. Yeah. The fact is, it's a workplace. It's a public-facing workplace. One of the two guys we're talking about here has been doing his job for 20 years and knows how to work that PR, and one of them is junior to that guy, and his job is to go out and sell. To some extent, his job is to sell what he's told to sell. And if the inventory changes and no one tells him, then he ends up holding the bag, and he looks bad when he is not the problem.
Yeah. So, barring some sort of real catastrophe or some other blow up that we're not aware of now, Ollie will be the coach this year.
Yeah, I mean, look, if they rip off another 8 losses in a row or they get to the break and they're 30 games under 500, who the hell knows? Because at that point you're in such bizarro land that I would have no read on that. But barring something like that, I would be really surprised if that were to happen.
Yeah. And I guess, Jeff, just to go further down the rabbit hole, just for, who cares, right? It's a fun show. I guess if there is going to be a contingency plan for Ollie Marmol, who do you think has the best grip on the clubhouse from the coaching perspective?
My opinion on this is that if something insane were to happen, then you wouldn't be able to hire off the current coaching staff even as an interim. Because if it got that bad, if it got so bad that had to happen, I don't understand. I don't know how you could justify turning it over to one of the coaches who had been there through the mess, right? And again, I do not think that there is any chance of this happening. Not a realistic chance anyway. If it got that bad, if they were 20-50, I think it's Ben Johnson. I don't think it's anybody who's on the staff now.
Okay.
So do you think if the Cardinals feel the need, and I guess they're not really the type of team to do this, but if they feel the need to like fire somebody just to be like, hey, we fired somebody and it won't be Marmol, would like Dusty Blake be on the table, do you think? Or do you think
Hey,
he's safe as they come too?
weird. This season has gone so badly that I have spent some time thinking about this, and I don't know the answer, because any changes like that might happen would any changes like that might happen would reflect on the front office the exact same way that changing the manager would, and it would basically like, there is probably not, from a public relations perspective, a difference between firing the manager and firing the pitching coach, because they both look like a problem in the front office at this point. So in terms of what would practically make the team better, I don't think that firing Dusty makes the pitching staff better. I don't think Dusty's the reason that this particular group of pitchers is having a hard time. So I don't know. I have a really hard time figuring out what that would look like. Ultimately, I think because of the way they've gotten to this spot, the change would be higher up in baseball operations would be the only way you can justify it.
Well, I'm running out of time a little bit, so I wanted to this is fascinating, and I could do this all day, but I want to kind of get some quick hit roster things. And guys, you can jump in with any of these things too. So short answer format, short questions for you. Jeff, they made the decision to move Zach Thompson to the Memphis rotation at the extremely, opportune time of mid-May. I don't know exactly why that timing was. Will we see Thompson back in a Cardinal uniform this year?
I think we could. Okay. So again, there are two paths. I'll say if somebody gets hurt, sure. As far as the timing, it was a lot easier because Cabrera looked good again, and once Cabrera was fixed, then it was easier for them to justify moving Thompson down to get him in that position. If the Cardinals get to the deadline and they are sellers, they are going to need bodies. They're going to need guys to start. And could Zach Thompson at that point be here and start 10 games post deadline? Absolutely. Because if the Cardinals get to the end of July and they're 15 games out of first, then Jack Flaherty and Jordan Montgomery are pitching for someone else at the end of the year, right? And Thompson could definitely be a consideration there. Otherwise, I don't know. I think they would prefer. I think they would prefer to just let him start and let it run and see how it goes, and have him be a viable option going into spring next year.
This is something Gabe wrote about a little bit and has talked about on podcasts. Does this move? I realize they're lefty versus righty, and the Cabrera thing is part of this. But does this move in any way signifies that in the pecking order for 2024 that Thompson might be a little ahead of Palante, or no real connection?
Yeah, I think so.
Lefty versus righty. You think so?
I would. Yeah, I would be surprised if Palante ended up for them as a starter, I guess is the way that I look at it at this point. I think that they like the way his stuff plays in the bullpen enough, and they like enough of how the velo plays up, that I would be surprised if Palante moved back into the rotation at any point.
Okay. Guys, you got any follow-ups, anything to ask?
I agree. I think especially with Zach Thompson, I mean, you drafted him in the first round and you're looking to potentially get starting innings out of him, unless you're hoping he could be a Garrett Crochet type reliever, which I think is possible, but I would like to see what he can do out of the rotation, right? And I think a lot of people would. And I was having this conversation, this exact one, with a buddy of mine not too long ago, just kind of thinking where if you've got this guy like in the bullpen right now, and you've got a bunch of guys in the rotation who can induce swings and misses, but a guy like Zach Thompson, if you give him some time, I think absolutely could, especially with his mid-90s fastball. You're seeing a lot of lack of power, like I mentioned, from the guys 1 through 5, and especially when you get to an 0-2 count, you have a lot of guys who can lack that third swing and miss pitch. They can get that third strikeout, right? Not the third swing and miss pitch, but just in general, I think moving a guy who was drafted in the first round because he's got like put away stuff. Otherwise, in this contemporary age, you don't select a pitcher who's going to be is not inducing strikeouts high in the top rounds. But in that regard, I think it's completely fair to see where you would see Zach Thompson potentially moving back in the rotation later this year, especially with the options dwindling potentially next year. I could see him in the rotation next year, and especially over Palante. I think just given the fact that they've invested so much into Zach Thompson already, and just generally his upside is higher. I think that's a consensus. I think Thompson gets the keys first to whatever spot might be available for a guy like Palante.
Yeah, I think that's entirely fair.
I was looking at your questions, and this one I really would like to know. What does Matthew Liberatore have to do to get himself starting games at the MLB level?
He's got to get Steven Matz to pitch worse.
Oh,
I think
is Matz the one that's the most vulnerable, despite Flaherty's last couple outings?
So I think yes, and I actually think that the Matz conversation is tied to the Thompson conversation, in that part of the timing when they made that move, they didn't end up doing it because Matz made the start last weekend and Matz was pretty good in the start last Sunday. But part of the timing was Thompson could have backfilled Liberatore, who could have backfilled Matz, who could have backfilled Thompson, right? That would be one way to do that, would have been to move Matz in the spot that Thompson had, to move Liberatore into the rotation, and then to send Thompson down to be ready to be Liberatore. That would be one way to do that. I don't think Steven Matz is on like a start-to-start basis, but I do think that if Sunday had not gone well for him, then that would have been a very different conversation. As far as Flaherty goes and the rotation goes, I have a lot harder time. It is much harder for me to imagine them moving Flaherty out of the rotation, primarily because of contract stuff, right? Matz you have under control for 2 years, and you can move him to the bullpen, and look, he's already gotten paid. The Flaherty thing, if you demote Flaherty out of the rotation, number one, he's not been very good as a reliever in the very few times where you've seen it happen. Like, it hasn't really pumped his stuff in any sort of meaningful way. And number two, that's going to be a much bigger problem. Problem is the wrong word, but that's going to be a much harder sell, like clubhouse-wise, staff-wise, because then you're taking a guy on the eve of free agency and you're just like, whatever value he has left at that point, you are incinerating it. And you're also, frankly, hurting yourself in terms of trade value, because I think as the Cardinals get to the end of the season, and again, if they get to the point toward the deadline where they are looking like sellers, Flaherty is the guy I think that they move more aggressively to trade, because they probably won't be able to qualify him. Montgomery, they will be able to qualify because Montgomery is not going to take the QO. Flaherty, if I were the Cardinals, I would be concerned about qualifying Flaherty, because it, to me, would make all of the sense in the world for him to take it and still hit free agency at 28 instead of 27 and build a better platform here.
Yeah,
I agree.
So a follow-up to that is, since they have like no off days until May 31st, do you think there's a chance he's used as a sixth starter? Liberatore.
I don't know, because they have not really been real receptive to that when they've been asked in the past. And part of the reason, honestly, is what it does to just eat up a roster spot, right? Like, even in an 8-man bullpen, like, say, for sake of argument, say that Liberatore was on the roster as a sixth starter now and James Nail was at Memphis. I don't know who pitches the last 2 innings of that game last night, but whoever it is, that's going to eat into what Boston looks like and the way that ball rolls downhill. Like, say, for instance, that when Verhagen looks rough last night, that Verhagen still only pitches his 1 inning. I guess is it Palante on a back-to-back? Is it Cabrera? Are you wasting those bullets? Like, it's really like there is some value in having a guy to sop up innings in the bullpen, especially if you're a team that is going to have a lot of innings that need chewing up, right? If you are a team that's losing a lot and your leverage guys are not – if you're a team that's losing a lot, you're going to have more innings that need mopping up, and so the use of a mop-up guy becomes more important.
So,
which, like, it's not not ideal to get to the end of the year and have Helsley have 45 appearances because the team wasn't very good. But there's probably a medium in between, and that's where, like, the James Nails of the world become very important, or at least moderately important in the way that they help save the rest of the staff.
Yeah. Well, any final questions? We're running out of time here, but anything else that you guys wanted to hear about from Jeff?
I was just going to ask, I guess, with the pitching staff in the state of crisis that it is right now, and hopefully it's on its way up and on its rebound. I asked this previously on the last show, just talking about it in general, but do you see any sort of radical reconstruction of how pitchers are going to be deployed under Ollie Marmol at all. Like I was like potentially alluding to potentially having an opener and then following with a guy like Michaelis or potentially a Woodford, a guy who can eat you some outs once you've already established a fireballer who's already going to get you the first couple of outs and make it somewhat unpredictable.
Short answer, no. I don't know that they have necessarily steered into that stuff historically, and I don't really see a lot of evidence that they think that is the way forward for them. Especially like a guy like Michaelis, for instance, like those first innings matter. Like that routine matters and getting the early touches, and he's got 5 pitches and he's going to try to throw all 5 in the first 2 innings and figure out what he's got and what he doesn't. Right. So I don't know. I would have a hard time imagining that. I think in terms of the change that we might see is maybe some more multi-inning relief appearances, right? We might see more of the Chris Stratton gets 8 outs and throws 40 pitches and is down for 2 days. We might see Cabrera and Verhagen do some of that. We could even see Gallegos do some of that, right? I think that is more likely to be what you see a little different, just because they have had some success, and they do have the personnel right now that does make sense. Like they've been willing to push Palante and Stratton to 50 pitches out of the bullpen, which lets them make that kind of decision.
Yeah. Well, hey, I just want to say a huge thank you to Jeff, who has always just been a great friend to Viva Alberto's, and this is the kind of content. This is why you should read his stuff and why we have him on and why we, tweet his tweets and all these things, because you don't get this kind of content everywhere. And this is some new information today,
Yeah, this will be the next time I get yelled at, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, probably so. Well, let's still have a little bit of time before that happens. But Jeff, I just want to say a huge thank you and great job. And this will post tomorrow morning, so there won't be the normal day break, but I'm hoping to get this out Friday morning. So you guys will see this on the site then. And give Jeff a like and a subscribe. And what are you working on right now over at the Belleville News-Democrat?
Sorting through the wreckage of the worst start to a season since 1907. So enjoy your updates of what's been a very weird first 6 weeks of the year. No, like there's going to London in a month. Excited for that. So look for a bunch of fun stuff there. Otherwise, it'll be wherever the Cardinals go, we shall follow. So I'll be around.
Great. Well, thanks again, Jeff. Thanks to Gabe. Thanks to Adam. And thanks to all of you for liking and subscribing. And we will see you this weekend. Have a wonderful day, Viva Alberto's. We'll see you soon.